live on air. Sometimes, not even real mistakes, it's just a slip of the tongue. What they say doesn't come out the way they'd ideally want it to be. If they'd been writing it, they'd backspace it, they'd think it over, they'd phrase it a little differently. But you got to go with it in the moment. You got to embrace what you're saying. You got to hope that later on you can fix things, or it's not a big deal and you continue on. Now, I'm not making this video to kind of like crush Jat and to wreck him and really like rip him open and ream the shit out of him and show that like, oh yeah, what an idiot, oh, he doesn't know anything, oh, what a piece of shit. No, none of that. Rather, the real point of this video is to highlight some specific instances where I think Jat made a choice, and the concept behind this little theme, this little recurring segment, was to present a scenario where it was kind of a cognitive dissonance, where on one hand, the person I'm labeling as Jat thought one thing about a Western region, could be EU, could be NA. They thought one thing positively about them, and then I tried to take the same mechanism of logic that they used in that area, and they spun in a positive way, and then apply it to usually an Asian region, but sometimes NA versus EU, for example, when they're the antagonist, and apply the same logic, but come up with what ends up being ultimately kind of a pessimistic or a cynical or a negative perspective, yet using the same logic. And so the cognitive dissonance here is, because the person likes NA or the Western region, depending on which is the protagonist in this particular sense, they're using the same logic for two different ends, which obviously shouldn't work. And therefore I presented it as kind of the dilemma, and I used Jat as the figurehead for this. And the dilemma obviously is, how does he resolve this in his own mind that he thinks these two things at once? Now, first of all, again, it was a small segment on a talk show, but it caught on. People referenced it a bunch of times. I don't know if people say it in Twitch chat, I don't read Twitch chat, but I know people have said it on Reddit over the years. And I know they said C9 was the strongest team at Worlds because they went 25-3. Likewise, I have never said an EU team is far weaker than NA because they couldn't beat their own region. Pause a second. By the way, no one in the chat dilemma, even one who ever said C9 was best in Worlds. Right, go back. It's always dependent on context. Back in 2013, I did Jat 22, which is reference to Catch 22, where a guy was in kind of a crazy dilemma, where obviously he was trying to prove that he was crazy to get out of the army, but he couldn't quite do so, and therefore he's stuck in the army, but he's trying to... So what's funny is, you've in a weird way, I don't know who brought that name up, you're almost, everyone thought this at the time, referencing the Jat dilemma, but you've changed the name and made it your own feature, so you're almost associating it with yourself. Now, I like that. Own it. Just take it and go, fuck it, and here's what I think, and here's what I'm going to set up as an interesting thought. But don't then complain that people keep referencing it after that, and you've also made a feature like that. So you did a feature like that when Fnatic went 18-0. Remember when they won the regular season? Now, they obviously didn't go undefeated in the playoffs, because that was the one where they got into the finals and played a very close series against Origin. But obviously, yeah, they were undefeated until the finals. Now, what's funny is he did not make a similar kind of point here about EU, because, by the way, EU was clearly the best in terms of Fnatic being the most dominant team in the West at the time. He didn't, in this scenario, make a similar point about EU and about how the rest of the teams must be weak, and how a third best team like HK must be very weak if they can't win any games against Fnatic. And so, also, EU then provided us an opportunity to actually look at what his point about Korea and ask how much validity is there. That was a little bit of validity. Obviously, they can't be the perfect teams, but in a more general sense, obviously the next season of OGen, incredibly competitive. Show how ludicrous it would be if you tried to resolve this cognitive dissonance, because it would just show how ridiculously biased it seemed to NA in that particular scenario. Now then, with that said, I did that for effect. It was a talk show. Now, people then usually link to a different video, which is the one he actually even might have been linked to, I can't remember, maybe it was in the thread, which was another Jat dilemma, which actually came when Forgiven was on the show. The other one was when Miffy was on the show. This one was when Forgiven was on the show. The other one was from season 9 of something, I forget which episode, this one was maybe 41 or something. It was in spring of 2015, that season, where SK Telecom had got SK Gaming in Europe, almost pulled a Dustin Beck there, against Stardate, who I referenced as the more threatening Yasuo player at the time, which based on enemy bans and play rate was absolutely accurate. Most of the misconceptions stem from this tweet 1 year ago, which is a tweet from me, where I said, good job D-Man and Pawn good job D-Man and Jat told us Pawn isn't really a Yasuo player. I mean, Blue themselves only banned it versus him in the semis. Now, so Jat addresses that. What's interesting about this is him again. What's interesting about this is Thorin claims that Blue themselves banned it versus him in the semis, which isn't true. If you check times in China. D-Man then said, of course, that isn't against a lot of Chinese mid laners. Of course, that isn't against a lot of Chinese mid laners. Yasuo is a big threat there. Horn, not so much. Now, first of all, you can obviously argue the semantic argument of like, well, which way are you going with it? They're a threat. Like, is he a threat to pick it, or is